Welcome to P Passionate W World, R Radio N Network, LLC, a multimedia company. Ann Arbor, Michigan, Boston, Massachusetts, Liverpool, England, Melrose, Florida, Los Angeles, California, Fullerton, California, Washington, D.C., Chicago, Illinois are one of the many broadcast homes of PWRN, a multimedia company. The world in your hands. And now, without further ado, let me present to you one of our many hosts and their programs.
Welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe. My name is Toni Quest, and I'm really happy that you're here. I like to interview the most interesting people I can find on the planet. So grab a cup of coffee, sit down, relax, and listen. You're going to find that these guests are so intriguing, you'll wonder why you didn't know about them before. Hi, welcome back to the Energy Stoners Cafe. I'm so happy today. I have a person that I've interviewed before under different platform, and I so admire her. Her name is Norma Uranga. She's a hypnotist, and she uses hypnosis to help people with a lot of different issues. I won't say definitely problems, but issues. I've learned through Norma that hypnosis can be used to do things that are very beneficial to your life. And I find it fascinating that she can bring someone into a trance and change their life. Well, in this particular show, Norma and I are going to discuss her experience, and we're going to talk about her knowledge and experience in hypnosis with regard to dealing with people that are dealing with issues of addiction, which is kind of a hot button these days. I'd say it's an international issue. So Norma, welcome back to talking to me, and welcome to the Energy Stoners Cafe.
Thank you. I'm happy to be back. I'm always happy to bring you up to date and bring the audience up to date.
Thank you. And you're definitely a valued friend of my shows, and I feel very honored to have you on. So in this show, Norma, I know we talked very briefly about what the topic would be, and I think that you were correct in saying we should talk about addiction because it is an issue and it comes in many forms.
Yes, it does.
So explain, how can hypnosis actually help people with addiction? Is it their thinking or their behavior or both? How does it work?
In some cases, and in most cases, when you talk about alcohol and other substances, also, of course, smoking, there is a center in the brain, which is the pleasure center. And that center is activated through circuitry, which we don't understand. I don't understand it either. Is activated and it delivers the pleasure principle. So your brain does get used to having that shot, if you want to call it shot, of that pleasure principle. Now, I read not too long ago, and this is so accurate, that the addiction is the symptom. The compulsion is the disease.
Oh, okay.
Isn't that something? I didn't even think about that, but that's what it is. So you got these two hormones going on in the brain, GABA and neuroperine or something. I'm sorry.
Neuroserotonin.
No, not the serotonin. In alcohol, I'm talking about alcohol now.
Okay, I'm sorry.
So if you drink, and I'm talking now about drinking more, drinking less, that is something that a hypnotist will have to assess.
How would you assess that?
You have to ask how much the person drinks. Does he drink 5 ounces? Does he drink a bottle of vodka a day? Oh, by the way, and something else, I also read that in terms of actual substance abuse and alcohol, you really need to work with an MD.
Okay.
And the person who is in the process of quitting or stopping, whatever you want to call it, has to start the process of detox with the MD at the same time then coming to me.
Oh, that's interesting to know. And I think that most people, because I didn't know this, I imagine most people did not know this.
Yes, yes, that's very true. Withdrawal is a very painful process, and I'm sure that this is not news to anyone. It takes 2 to 3 weeks. The withdrawal can manifest itself in terms of seizures when it comes to alcohol, in terms of sweaty pain, hands, in terms of increased heartbeat and pressure, blood pressure. So you have all these physical things going on through withdrawal, and it is very painful for the client to go through this cycle. So what you would like to do is have the client work with an MD, have the process going on. So then the person comes to me and I support him in other ways.
It's interesting that you mentioned that it's painful because so often I can dare to say that most people know somebody in their lives that have an addiction.
Oh, yes.
You know,
oh, yes.
it could be a parent, it could be a friend, it could be a sibling, it could be themselves.
Right.
But it's interesting that I've found that people will say that when somebody has a problem with a substance or an addiction, they think it's that people can just stop at the snap of a finger.
No, not at all, Tony. Not at all. It is very painful to go through one of those withdrawals. And I mean alcohol. And I mean if you drink every day. Obviously, the amount is crucial. And let me tell you another point that's crucial, that you lose your control. In other words, you're saying to yourself, oh, my little granddaughter, I'm just giving an example. You know, my wife has asked me to stop drinking, okay? And yet the person goes right on and just ignores that. Well, he or she does not ignore it on purpose. It's driven. It's driven by the need to have this kind of stimulation with the hormones that are going on in the brain. So they are victims. They are not somebody that want to create problems for themselves or for their loved ones.
So they are victims.
Absolutely. And one of the things, like I said, the main thing is, does the person lose control and show bizarre behavior, loses a job, you know, his financial or her financial security is diminished. So there are many things that are problematic because of the habit or the addiction or the compulsion.
So I imagine you take the substance away, there'll be some changes hormonally in the body. It just stands to reason.
In the brain especially. You know, we as lay people, we're not doctors, but as lay people, lay hypnotists, I should say, we do have to have certain basic knowledge of how the brain works.
Yes.
And what are its parts? And what happens when people drink constantly? What's going on? And there comes a point in which the brain is so messed up, it has to restore itself. And that's when you go, hopefully, that's when the person will say, oh, well, I need to go to a doctor and take care of this. Because my understanding is that there are addiction doctors, by the way. Yes. There are addiction doctors, and they can make the process easier and less painful.
With other pharmaceuticals?
Medications.
With medications.
Specific medications, not any medications, specific medications. And I think it's great that there are doctors that take care of these people because they really need the help. But we cannot help them. They do not mean to hurt us, to put the relationship in jeopardy, to hurt the family. It's not that. It's beyond their control. That's why it's called an addiction or a compulsion.
It's interesting. So now we know it's the compulsion, the addiction is the symptom. In hypnosis, Norma, do you find, I'll say it this way, in administering hypnosis to a client for addiction, I imagine that you're changing their thinking, which ultimately changes their behavior.
Right. And that's the idea. Well, you see, we all have, as a side comment, but a very important one, we all have an identity. I'm a hypnotist. Well, that's an identity. When I was an educator, that's an identity. Mm-hmm. So the people that drink, and every AA program will say, I am so-and-so and I'm an alcoholic. So the first thing in hypnosis that you want to do, because they do things that do go contrary to where success comes in. You cannot sit in a conference hall and hear one sad story after another, plus your own, and the identity of all these people saying that they're alcoholics or they are an addict, without the brain being influenced by all this negative identity. So what happens? It really goes into your brain. It doesn't help you.
And it goes into the subconscious?
Yes, it does not help at all. Not help. As a matter of fact, what you want to do, and this is a very important strategy, what you want to do in hypnosis is work with the alcoholic, let's say, for 30 days. So you make goals for 30 days. Then you go to 60 days and you make goals for 60 days. So you are constantly working in cycles. You're constantly adding happiness and self-esteem in the person's life. You're not taking it away by saying, I am an alcoholic.
Right, because I've often heard that alcoholism and addiction are self-diagnosed diseases, because once a person says those words, I am blah, 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 it's a self-diagnosis.
Yes, and one of the things that I would want somebody that comes to me is if they said to me, I'm an alcoholic, I would ask, and who diagnosed you? You want to have that, because the most important thing is how this person sees itself. And if this person sees itself as breaking the rules, screwing up in an affair, maybe getting sick, embarrassing people, you need to know that. You need to know that this person has gotten to the point where he says, okay, and by the way, you do not go for anyone. You go for yourself. The minute that you say, my wife said that, she's going to leave me. That's wrong motive. Yeah. Wrong motive.
That's usually a catalyst, though, for a lot of people that I've seen this.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. My daughter, my granddaughter, my son, my wife. You can't have it. You need to see how you need to really show the person little by little, and this is done in hypnosis, by planning his life ahead. In the cycles that I told you, you will inculcate in that person a new view of the joy that is in everyday living. And you will tell them that this is what they're missing.
There are things, that's a more positive approach.
Of course it is.
I would say definitely. Now, I'm going to ask you a question. I've heard the term post-hypnotic suggestion. Mm-hmm. And I think I've heard this term. I know kind of what it means, but I'm from the generation that remembers TV shows like The Amazing Kreskin. I think the good portion of our audience might not know who that is, but he used to have a TV show. I'm giggling because I used to watch it, and I used to watch this show, and I was so fascinated by it. And they used the term post-hypnotic suggestion. And our director and I were talking before we called you, and we were talking about post-hypnotic suggestion, and he said, that's kind of like when they give you a suggestion that you're going to go into a trance and quack like a duck.
Yeah, well, most people do have that perception. I'm not surprised.
Tell us a little bit about what post-hypnotic
suggestion is after the person comes out of trance. The hypnotherapist would say to Johnny, so what do you think you will do now when you, in 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks, and you go to this Christmas dinner? What are you going to do now? Let's say suggestion. Right. You want them to tell you what they're going to do because you want that idea embedded. And then comes, of course, the question of anchors. Anchors are positive statements that are worked out during hypnotherapy that the client later on can use to stop himself from whatever negative behavior he's exhibiting.
So it's kind of almost like a stimulus response kind of thing.
Exactly. And it can be the most insignificant thing, like once or twice tapping the top of your hand. I don't know, or putting your fingers together. That's a classic one. The one of putting your thumb and your index finger together. That is used a lot as an anchor.
It's interesting. I mean, I know I have a certain thing I do. I just kind of evolved into it when I'm feeling I don't want to be tempted by eating the candy. It almost looks like I'm just clasping my hands, but I'm like actually pulling my fingers apart. On one hand, the other, and nobody notices it, but it keeps me from going to the Viennese cart.
I know. Isn't that something? I love those carts, I have to tell you.
So delicious. Darn. Why does it have to taste so good?
I'd rather have that instead of cake and everything else. I mean, those little petite, whatever they call them, petite.
Those petit fours and the little puff pastries. Yum.
Delicious.
Yes.
Delicious. Yes. So you have developed your own anchor. And that's done in hypnosis. And there is a way to do it. I mean, you just don't say, okay, this is what you're going to remember when you get to the situation. No, you have to really do it with the senses of touch, and then the senses of the imagination, and even hearing. And if you can do it, you do also the olfactory. I always, forget how to say that word. The nose. That's
olfactory,
one of the most.
Yes, olfactory. Yes.
That's one of the strongest senses.
Really, the smell. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I've heard people getting triggered by certain smells. People with PTSD. Especially
right.
soldiers, they'll smell something that was from their combat, and that'll
yes.
or hear something. I think that's like very, very interesting. Now, I find that a lot of people believe that if they go into a state of hypnosis, that they're going to lose control.
That is another perception that is pretty common.
Is it a myth?
It is a myth. It is a myth. And hypnosis has had a long track record of entertainment, which most people don't know about. Hypnosis is also beginning to have a track record in the mental health or the health centers. And it's quickly getting, acceptance. It's quickly getting success rates and many other stuff that we didn't have before. But people remember the entertainment, the stage, the person, the losing control, the chicken, those kinds of things. Yeah, that is not what actually happened. In trance, you're fully conscious, but you're fully absorbed in whatever the hypnotist is asking you to do. Fully absorbed. So when you're fully absorbed in listening, in feeling, even in touching, you can't get away from that. Therefore, that part of the brain, which is thinking about something else, stops.
Oh, so you're saying that the one part of the brain is operating, and with hypnosis, you can make the another part of the brain will take over?
Right.
Okay.
In other words, there is a part of the brain called the prefrontal lobe. And it's right up front. And that is where all the executive decisions are made.
Just explain to our audience when you say the executive decisions, because I don't think they understand what you mean by that.
Well, okay. An executive decision would be, is this job a good job for me? That's an executive decision. It has implications. It has lasting results. Another part that we do a lot is when we go to a movie, we evaluate the movie. That's a very simple example of an executive decision. When we decide that we like a particular taste, well, I should give you that one. That has ramifications. But
it does for me. I know that's for sure.
You need to remember, we have our senses and all our memories. Listen to this. All our memories are in the senses.
It's in the sight, the sound, the taste, the smell, and the touch.
Right. All our memories are in there.
Yes.
And by the way, we have so much memory, but we just, block it out because we're dealing with everyday survival also.
Right.
So we have to be on top of what's going on in our world.
Do you think that hypnosis helps people compartmentalize a lot of these things?
I wouldn't say that, but there is a recall section in the hypnosis process where the person, sometimes it's necessary for the person to go back to the trauma. And then during that going back, that's when the hypnotist does the healing.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Trauma has to be healed. But in order to heal it, you got to go back there.
Yeah, and problem is usually with trauma, it is not healed. It sort of lingers. It sort of hangs out. And
I'll tell you, trauma is very interesting. And by that, I mean that sometimes with trauma, and the person is not even conscious of this, but they are in constant vigilance. You walk around, and this happens, by the way. You walk around looking to see who's behind you, who's next to you, if anybody looks weird, if anybody is carrying anything. But it's hypervigilance. It's not normal vigilance. It's hypervigilance.
the hypervigilance, I imagine it can border on paranoia.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. But this is how trauma clients deal with the trauma. It doesn't mean that they are constantly thinking about the trauma. That doesn't mean that at all. It's a coping mechanism because the trauma is there. It has not been healed. And, like I said, it's trauma. So that means that you're going to remember that or not remember. Now, some people do remember, trauma. They do remember and others don't. Now, we don't know why that happens, but it does happen. But through time regression, you can go back on your timeline, which is your life, and you go back on your timeline to the time when you had this trauma.
Once the hypnotist, let someone like you, hypnotherapist, comes in, you can actually deal with the fact that their trauma has come forward and maybe they might not have remembered it, and now they remember it, and now you can kind of manipulate that a little bit to turn it positive.
There are certain techniques, and visualization is a big one, but there are techniques in order to help the person see the trauma in different ways, which is a question of reframing. It's called the reframing. And it doesn't mean that you're justifying the trauma. It doesn't mean that at all. It means that because you are so far ahead of your evolution as a human being, that you're now able to see this in another light so that it doesn't ruin your life.
I imagine that children, as I did have a childhood, someone told me once, it was a long time ago. I imagine that children are very good at this defense mechanism with trauma.
Yes, and children are very interesting because they can tell you exactly, what's going on. They won't tell you, oh, I did this because of that or because my dad did this so long ago. But they'll tell you, no, I just feel scared.
Right. They'll just identify the emotion.
Exactly. I just feel scared. I don't want to go there. They'll tell you that. Okay. And then, the therapist will then go and say, okay, does this this emotion, this feeling, does it look like anyone?
And also, I noticed that a lot of times when maybe we watch a little bit too much of these crime shows or whatever, but often it's not unusual for a child to draw a picture of what happened.
Yes, it is. And psychotherapists use that technique all the time. Hypnotists do not use it that much, but psychotherapists do. That's why they have the Rorschach test, which is and different kinds of things that they give to the child. But children are very imaginative. This is their world. Imagination is their word. And they like to make things big. So they will explain to you, or even not explain. They will say to you, no, I don't want to go there. And you'll say, but why? Because I am afraid I won't see my mommy. That kind of a thing. And they won't tell you right away, somebody took me. Then you probe and you probe and you probe. It's all about probing. It's all about probing and what memories, this person has. You have to work them through.
I think that it's probably like a really delicate process. Norman, I got to tell you that I can imagine, having you on again about a lot of different things. And, when you talk about the subconscious and how powerful it is. And I do think about, often my own life and other people's lives. I also think about the things I've seen on Dateline when they're solving a crime and a child gets involved. And this is reality in that particular case. I saw one where the kid drew a picture of her mother being stabbed to death.
Yes.
She wouldn't speak. Yeah, and this kid would not speak, but she would draw the picture.
Yeah, that trauma can manifest itself in different ways. Hypervigilance is one way. Another way is no language.
No language, yes.
At all.
It's interesting, and I think as an adult, I believe that we maintain our childhood mind in an odd kind of way. And at one point, I would love to talk to you about children I've encountered in teaching that I believed had something very, very, I'd say, profound to share about themselves, or have an instinct or a talent of knowing.
They are an open book. They're an open book.
Mm-hmm.
If you know how to find that imagination, you will know what it is that they are, that they lived,
mm-hmm.
that they will live, and why they're not doing this and why they are not doing that. But you can't confront people, Tony. This is the thing. In hypnosis, you don't confront people. You make direct and indirect, what is called direct and indirect suggestions. The direct suggestions are out of trance, and the indirect are in trance.
So it sounds like what you do is actually you turn things inside out, and then your
Right.
clients direct themselves.
Right.
So I wish we had another 3 hours to talk about this, but I'm going to have you back on regularly.
Good. I'm happy to talk about this because I have a passion for this. I cannot have enough conferences. I cannot have enough workshops, on the subject, whatever it is, video conferencing, regular conferencing. I just love the idea of learning this topic, if you want to call it, inside out.
So tell our audience where they can get in touch with you if they choose to. How could they find you?
My business is Hypnosis Life Coaching of Westchester.
.com?
Yes, .com.
So they could email you through there, correct?
Yes, they can email me or they can call me. My telephone number, 917-217-1553. I will get back to them. And because I really, when I see someone for the first time, I accept that person, who she or he is. No judgment, no judgment.
I thank you so much, Norma, for coming. You're so astute at what you do, and one can hear through your voice just the genuine...
Thank you. Yes.
Genuine love and compassion.
I do. And then invite me back, and I'll have some more goody stuff to share.
Yes, you'll be back sooner than later, and I thank you so much.
You're very welcome. We'll talk soon.
We will.
Bye now.
Bye now, and I thank the audience for tuning in to the Energy Stoners Cafe podcast. I'm Tony Quest. You can email me at my email address, which is tonyquesttv@gmail.com. And I look forward to sharing another great guest with you on the Energy Stoners Cafe. Thank you very much. Goodbye. Thank you for listening to the Energy Stoners Cafe.
Thank you for listening to Passionate World Radio Network, a multimedia company. You can listen to this program all over again at passionateworldradionetwork.com, facebook.com/PWRN, twitter.com/PWRN, googleplus.com/PWRN. Distinguish yourself from the ordinary. And remember, please keep listening.